Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review of the Harbor Freight Diamond Honing Blocks, or the Diamond Grit Sharpening Stones. Come in a weird little package that looks like this. We have 3 pieces. They're 2 by 6 inches, which I believe is like a relatively standard size for sharpening stones. I did find item number 36799. We have 3 different grits. We have a 180, a 260, and a 360. I've read a bunch of reviews. People generally like these because they're $10 for a set. I don't like them as much as other people do, mainly because, you know, they're pretty cheaply made. Diamond hone or diamond sharpening plates or stones it can be pretty expensive for a quality brand, so I understand why people like these, but I had a few issues. The biggest issue was, one, only this blue one was straight. And what it is, it's just a piece of sheet metal that they, you know, spray a diamond grit on, and then, you know, chrome plate to keep the grit from scraping off. They say triple coated, but in reality, if we look close, you know, it doesn't really look like it's triple coated. It's more like they just put enough grit on it so it looks more like a actual commercial version. There is a pretty heavy amount of grit. It does get a little light right at the end because of the dipping process they use when they plate them. But my biggest issue was only the blue one was straight. Like the yellow one, they were just curved. We can see if I can get my hand back there. You can, there we go. You can just see the gap. So these things are pretty bent. This red one, I thought, well, I'll just try flexing it a little bit, and whatever plastic it is, it's really hard acrylic, and it just snapped, and of course, put a kink in it, so that one's ruined. But it probably works just about the same because these have, you know, a bow. So when you're sharpening, you have to, you know, use kind of an odd technique if you're lying them flat. If you do the type of sharpening where you're using these, say, in the hand, then it won't be such a big deal. But if you're lying them flat on a surface, then of course the bow will be an issue. People really like these. I do understand why. Because of the diamond grit on these, when you're sharpening steels, the diamond is just so much harder than the stone that it gets a huge amount of grip. Really is very aggressive in removing material. And that leads me to another issue, which is that the finest one is still only 360 grit. And with the aggressiveness of diamond against steel, that's actually pretty coarse. And it would have been nice if they had like a 600 grit one. I just think they're too coarse. Although like this blue one, which is 180 grit, it would be real fast to sharpen an axe or something. I mean, I'm sure you could sharpen an axe in 30 seconds by hand just because of how aggressive these things are. Now, the big deal about Harbor Freight selling these, and I appreciate that, is Harbor Freight sells these zirconium oxide ceramic knives, and they're very hard, much harder than steel. I think they're around Rockwell 70, 75, something like that. They're real hard, much harder, and so they sell these diamond hones, I believe, just to go along with these knives. Or at least I'm assuming that way when you're sharpening, or that way they're actually selling something that you can sharpen their ceramic knives with, because you can't sharpen these with the stones. Technically you can, but it'll just take you hours and hours because they're just not hard enough. But even with the diamond hones, these ceramic blades still actually skate. You do have to use quite a bit of pressure, and it takes quite a while to sharpen. And I was discovering, you know, trying to do that is, and I may have not mentioned that on the reviews of these Harbor Freight knives, but they have this plastic thing here that kind of blocks off the bottom of the blade, so it actually makes it pretty difficult to sharpen right here at the back. So, real disappointment about that. If we have a more standard knife, and this is, you know, I don't have great knives, but I have a decent one here. It's a molybdenum steel Madame knife made in Japan. And for me, they really do work pretty well. You know, if you just take a more standard kitchen knife and you just do something like this, and then on the other side a little bit of the same technique, literally just something that quick really brings a bunch of the edge back. If I did that just for a few more seconds, this knife would essentially be sharpened. Let's see if I can get, let me zoom in the max that this camera will do, see if you can look at the little edge that oh, you can. Let's see if I can just get the right light. So you can see the edge, it's a little bit hard, but you can see the edge is sandpapered. It's still pretty rough, even on the 360 grit one. And so I really do notice that it's the fine one is still really a bit coarse, and so it does sharpen well. It just leaves a pretty rough edge on the blade. Usually once you get the blade edge there, then you want to use a very fine block. Sharpening blocks can go up to insane grits. I've seen 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 grit blocks just to get super, super, super fine edges. So these I would generally say are roughing. For 10 bucks, for how quickly they work, you know, for many people, they'll be great. Just remember that they're on these plastic backs. They have some kind of weird glue, so you may be able to pull off this piece of sheet metal and attach it to, say, a flat piece of aluminum to make them a little bit more usable. The plastic blocks are very brittle, so if they get bent, they'll want to crack. And they're cheaply made. It's just that diamond grit blocks work really, really quickly. So I get these more for utility purposes as opposed to maybe using for actual kitchen knives, just because they don't achieve a super keen edge just because of how aggressive the diamond is. It just ends up being like sandpaper. Really pretty rough. So they're better for axes and chisels and things like that. Or maybe you have a power planer and you want to sharpen some of the carbide bits. But, you know, even for 10 bucks, I was just kind of disappointed. Kind of disappointed that the plastic backings are so brittle yet not even straight. You know, it makes them harder to use. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. This was my little review of these Harbor Freight Diamond Home blocks. I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.